Okay, welcome back. So hopefully you've had the opportunity to see how child support is calculated in Connecticut. Um, I have a video on my social media as well as my website. I would suggest the website because that's where you'll find all of my information. And hopefully it'll be easy to find, and I'll always be adding, so be sure to return on a regular basis. So what I plan to do now is start a series as to how the child support guidelines can be improved in Connecticut, as well as custody arrangements and procedures in the family court to make sure that everything is fair and equitable for everybody, keeping the child's best interest in mind truly. So my campaign focus is that children should have open access to both parents as circumstances allow. And I understand that things might be different in different situations, and that's why we're going to give this leeway when necessary, but it's going to be very strictly held. We'll talk more about that in another video. But I will tell you that my belief is that the baseline should be 50-50 custody with no child support awarded unless there's an amount earned by one parent where they could easily support the other household without diminishing the current quality of life of the child. And we'll, like I said, we'll talk more about that in another video. The emotional and physical well-being of the children and parents. We need to ensure that each parent is responsible for the emotional and economic needs of the children. Now, I want to make it clear, I am not in any way, shape, or form trying to enable deadbeat parents. Don't believe it. I can't even understand how a parent wouldn't want to take care of and see their children, because my children are the most important thing in my life. So, I mean, I just couldn't understand another way of thinking. Ensure that no human needs or rights are being violated. Talk more about how the state imposes their will on some people, and it's not justifiable. We'll talk more about that later. And ensure that the courts promote justice over procedures. I've experienced firsthand, and I've heard horror stories, how judges were unwilling to hear pertinent information, because of circumstances or even personal beliefs. I've had that happen to me personally, and we'll get into all of that eventually. It's a whole story. It's great. And so here is page 22 of the Connecticut Child Support Guidelines, and it's the shared physical custody part. That's my main focus in this campaign, is getting parents to have shared physical custody as close to 50-50 as possible, and also being responsible, for their children. And so I highlighted here that the commission that made the guidelines continues to reject the notion of a mathematical formula based on the time spent with each parent to determine their support amounts in shared physical custody context. They claim that application of such a formula would tend to shift the focus away from the best interests of the child and move toward financial considerations, which would be inconsistent with Connecticut law. Well, I believe that this just does not promote equal shared custody. And the reason being is, if you go back and look how the child support is calculated, it then becomes up to a judge to determine whether deviation is necessary or warranted. And I just don't understand, that's why I said that the baseline should be 50-50 custody. As soon as you walk into court, 50-50, no support, now tell me why I should change it. Versus now, it's almost like, okay, well, the lower earner gets this, now you gotta tell me why I could change it. And this often results in expensive court fees, a lot of aggression between the parents. It's almost like telling a person accused of a crime, hey, you know what, you're guilty until proven innocent. Now you got to figure out how to prove yourself innocent. And that's just not the way it's supposed to work. It doesn't work like that in criminal court. I don't know why it works like that in family court. So the document suggests that using parenting time to calculate child support would shift the focus away from the best interest of the children and shift it more towards economics, which I totally disagree with because, first of all, this whole document is focused on economics. That's all it really talks about. It has nothing to do with custody, has nothing to do with best interest of the child, support, emotional, like nothing. It's all money. And I believe that it's also shifted away from the best interest of the child because um, the child has a certain quality of life when the parents are together. And that quality of life is completely destroyed, especially by these guidelines. How? Well, first of all, you have the lower income earner and the higher income earner splitting, mom and dad, right? And so the lower income is one income and the higher is another. Let's use the higher as residence A for right now. And so in residence A, where everybody was together and we had lower income, higher income together in one pool, well, now we only have the higher income because the lower income uh, parent left the relationship or got kicked out of the relationship, however, whatever happened. And on top of it, you're going to take the higher earner and split their resources to pay the lower earner. And now, in that residence A, that child's quality of life has greatly decreased. Who knows if that parent could even pay the mortgage? So I believe that just doesn't make sense. As equally as circumstances allow, children need to be with both mom and dad who are both emotionally well. Like I said, I believe courts should use 50-50 as a baseline. If they're willing to take care of their children, if parents are willing to take care of their children, um, and there are no extenuating circumstances such as abuse or unsuitability to be with the child, then it doesn't seem right for the higher earner to have to pay anything and have freedom taken away when they are fulfilling their responsibilities to the child, you know. And I get it. The state argues that, hey, well, the child needs to have the same quality of life in the other residents, and I'll argue no, they don't. As long as they're cared for and loved, um, and their needs are met, then that's what we should be focusing on, not that equal is better, not at the cost of taking away somebody's freedom. And so the higher earner may feel that due to the unfairness of the process, that their only option is to avoid the situation, therefore reducing their time with the children. And so I've seen, this is where the term deadbeat dad sometimes comes from. I'm not justifying those who avoid the responsibility altogether. And at the same time, I can certainly understand when they feel taken advantage of or used or having another's will imposed upon them when they're still trying to do the right thing. That just doesn't sit well with me, and I hope it doesn't sit well with you either. And it also perpetuates animosity between parents, potentially affecting the children. I mean, how could you possibly hope to heal the relationship between mom and dad at least enough? I'm not saying get back together, but at least enough to do the best for the children when one of them has become, the subordinate and the other has become the controller. It just doesn't work like that. I mean, remember, freedom has been burned into our DNA, especially as Americans. Give me liberty or give me death. We've seen that. New Hampshire's motto is live free or die. Take Mexico's Emiliano Zapata. He said, I'd rather die on my feet than live on my knees. Just is ingrained in our DNA that freedom is number one. So I'm going to move myself out of the way here so I could read what I highlighted. And so, like I said, I believe the 50-50 should be baseline. The way it is now, it says courts still must determine what precise level of sharing is sufficient to warrant a deviation from presumptive child support amounts. I mean, this basically means that, hey, you know what? For this family, you got to have the kid half the time if I'm going to change anything. Or for this family, you got to have the child for at least 2 days a week. I mean, it could differ, varying on a lot of factors. We'll talk a little bit about that. It says the Commission continues to reject a bright line definitional test as well as a formula approach to shared custody situations to discourage disputes over time sharing as means of affecting support amounts. The Commission believes the approach continued in these regulations leaves sufficient room for the exercise of judicial discretion, so the judges get to decide, while providing a measure of predictability for the parties. I'm going to move myself back down so we get where I'm supposed to be, and we'll talk about this. So it doesn't uniformly and justly assign the responsibilities, right? So Connecticut really needs to have a schedule based upon parenting time. You have a 50-50, no custody. 25%, well then you take the money you were supposed to give the other parent and cut it, go by percentages, So under the current system, it's up to the court to decide what is and what isn't acceptable as shared parenting time. And not only that, but how much can be deducted from the calculated child support under the current guidelines, which means first they find out what they believe is enough time to warrant a deviation, and on top of it, they get to choose how much we get to deviate. So one judge might say, oh, you know what, 50-50 custody time, I'll take $10 a week off of what you owe. And another judge might say, oh, 50-50 parenting time, we'll take half of what you owe, but you still have to pay something. I mean, there's just too much variability. We really need guidelines. And according to the National Parents Organization, Connecticut is only one of 9 states lacking this formula. Okay, and so they even say that it relies on unnecessarily costly and lengthy court deviation procedures. So you got to go to court and fight for your rights instead of them just being granted to you like we were promised as born citizens of the United States of America. And so they say the lack of a presumptive parenting time adjustment as an integral component of mandated presumptive child support guidelines arguably violates federal regulatory requirements. In other words, we could argue that it goes against federal law that they don't even have this. And we should be looking into that. And the guidelines say that there might be disputes over custody to affect child support amounts. Well, that's not a bad thing, because if I can motivate a little bit for parents to have the kids 50-50, because that's what the kid really deserves, hey, you don't have to pay child support, then I'm going to do it, because the kids need the parents' time more than they need the money anyway. And so unless there's a substantiated claim of lack of suitability, hey, not a good parent because, or an agreement between the parents, maybe they're amicable enough to say, hey, you know what, hey, let's do this for child support because this is what I need, then that's fantastic. But we shouldn't be taking away economic freedom just at our whim because we believe that it's right for the kids, because it really isn't. Connecticut guidelines address a sufficient room for the exercise of judicial discretion. Judicial discretion. That means that the judge gets to decide. I don't know about that. Anytime there's a human equation that's introduced, especially kind of improvisationally, then errors and variability are inevitable. Like you can't, one guy might say this, one guy might say that. There's just no way to make sure that every single time they're going to get it right. It'd be more just and efficient just to have the information laid out fairly and then let the judge exercise deviation under specific and measurable conditions. Okay, and this is why we need to start off with 50-50 custody, no child support. We start like that, and now we have our baseline. And if we're going to change it, we better have a darn good reason to do so. The discretion. Some of the factors that might play into it could be possibly, what if the judge is having a bad day? What if the judge has a daughter that supposedly didn't get enough child support from the baby daddy? What if the judge has a son that had too much support taken away? All of these are going to factor in. This is why we need to have a set schedule, and then again, the measurable, proven reasons why we can change. So hopefully you agree with my position, and hopefully that this has been informative. I look forward to hearing what you've got to say, and thank you for listening.